Muskegon, the Lumber Queen and Fred's Big Chance is a spirited, heartfelt story that brings to life the rich origins of Muskegon during the 1880s lumber boom. It's a multi-generational tale of ambition, love, and resilience, a powerful tribute to the pioneers who turned forests into a thriving city and made Muskegon the most successful lumber town in America. That's why it was called the Lumber Queen. This story has a hero, and it is a living piece of our history. It instills community pride, deepens our understanding of who we are, and inspires future generations to appreciate their roots. Muskegon the Lumber Queen and Fred's Big Chance is a testament to the grit, soul, and perseverance that built our community, a legacy we all share. Chapter 1. A Town of Tall Pines. Long ago, before cars and airplanes, before computers and cell phones, Muskegon, Michigan was known as the Lumber Queen of the world. The town hummed with the sound of sawmills turning giant white pine trees into boards that would build houses, stores, schools, and churches all across America. The tall pines had stood for hundreds of years in the forests of Michigan, but now they were being cut down to help build a new nation. The Muskegon River was like a highway for the trees. In the spring, when the ice melted and the water rushed fast, men called log drivers floated the giant logs downriver to the sawmills. These men worked hard and risked their lives balancing on the slippery logs with long poles to keep them from getting stuck or jammed. One of those sawmills belonged to Mr. Sorensen, a kind but worried man who had spent his life building his mill. He was proud of the work he did, proud that his lumber helped build homes in towns far out west where new settlers were arriving. But this spring, Mr. Sorensen was in trouble. He owed money to the blacksmith, the shopkeeper, and even the feed store. His only hope was the big shipment of logs floating down the river. If the logs made it safely to his mill, he could saw them into lumber, sell the boards, and pay off his debts. But if anything happened to that shipment, if the logs didn't arrive, he could lose everything. That's why Mr. Sorensen hired Fred Hansen, a young man who had grown up in the logging camps. Fred was strong, smart, and full of ideas. He had worked hard in the woods, and now he had his first big chance to prove himself as a foreman in town. Fred was determined to help Mr. Sorensen save the mill. And maybe, just maybe, win the heart of Mr. Sorensen's daughter, Annie. Annie Sorensen was kind and clever. She helped her father keep the mill's books, writing down every penny they earned and spent. She loved Muskegon with its busy sawmills, its ships on the lake, and its smell of fresh-cut pine. But Annie was worried too. She knew if the logs didn't arrive, her father might be forced to sell the mill. Or worse, marry her off to the rich but mean Harry Dawson just to save their home. Dawson owned his own mill on the other side of town. He smiled a lot, but it was not a kind smile. He didn't care about Muskegon or its people. All Dawson wanted was more money, more power, and Annie's hand in marriage. As the town waited for the river drive to arrive, the air buzzed with excitement. The ice was gone from the lake. The river was running high, and everyone knew the logs would come soon. Fred checked the ropes and tools. Annie finished the books and looked over the water. Mr. Sorensen prayed his luck would hold. And somewhere nearby, Harry Dawson and a crooked log pirate named Gilmer whispered their wicked plans. The tall pines were coming down the river. The future of Muskegon and of Fred, Annie, and the Sorensen mill was riding on the flow. Chapter 2. Fred's Big Chance. Fred Hansen stood on the edge of Muskegon Lake, breathing in the cool spring air. The water sparkled in the sunshine, and the breeze carried the fresh scent of pine and sawdust. Fred felt proud and a little nervous. This was his first season as foreman at Sorensen's mill. The logs coming down the river weren't just wood, they were a promise of jobs, of homes, of a future for Muskegon, and they were Fred's responsibility now. Fred brushed a bit of sawdust from his shirt and grinned at Annie Sorensen as she walked toward him, holding a thick ledger book. Annie's long braid bounced as she hurried over. "Morning, Fred," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Father says you've got a good crew ready for the river drive." Fred nodded. "The best. Strong men who know the river. And I've checked every rope, chain, and boom. We'll have those logs turned into lumber and on their way to Chicago before Dawson can blink." Annie laughed softly. "I hope so. Father's counting on you, and so am I." Fred's heart raced a little at her words. He had admired Annie since they were children. Now he had a chance to show her, and the whole town, that he was more than just a woodsman's son. He was ready to help build Muskegon's future. Just then, Mr. Sorensen appeared from the mill, wiping his hands on a rag. His gray hair stuck out beneath his cap, and his eyes looked tired but kind. "Fred," he said, "I like your confidence, but don't forget, those logs are worth a fortune. There are men out there who'd like nothing better than to see me fail." "I won't let that happen, sir," Fred said firmly. "I'll see those logs safely to your mill." Mr. Sorensen gave a small smile. "That's what I like to hear. Now get going. The river waits for no man." Fred tipped his cap, set off at a brisk walk toward the supply shed. He had tools to check, men to meet, and plans to make. But as he passed the general store, he caught sight of Harry Dawson, standing on the boardwalk, his fancy boots polished, his mustache curled just so. Dawson leaned on his cane and gave Fred a slow, sneaky smile. "Off to play the hero, are you, Hansen?" Dawson called. "Don't work too hard. You wouldn't want to scuff those fine boots of yours in the mud." Fred didn't answer. He just kept walking, his jaw tight. Let Dawson laugh. Fred had a job to do, a big chance to prove himself, and he wouldn't let anyone stop him. Not Dawson, not the river, not even the worst spring storm. Somewhere out in the forest, thousands of logs waited to float down to Muskegon, and Fred Hansen was ready to meet them. Chapter 3. Trouble for Mr. Sorensen. The next morning, Muskegon awoke to the sound of church bells and the calls of teamsters driving wagons along the muddy streets. Down at the mill, Mr. Sorensen paced the floor of his office, worry creasing his brow. He stared out the window at Muskegon Lake, watching for any sign of the first logs coming down the river. "Where are they?" he muttered. "They should have been here by now." Annie sat at the big wooden desk, pretending to copy numbers into the ledger. But she kept glancing at her father, sharing his worry. The mill owed money all over town, to the blacksmith for shoeing the horses, to the general store for flour and beans, even to the rope maker for new lines to tie the logs. Without this shipment of logs, there would be no lumber. And without lumber, there would be no money to pay those bills. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Sorensen opened it to find Charlie the blacksmith standing there, wiping soot from his hands. "Morning, Arnie," Charlie said kindly. "Hate to bother you, but I'm getting behind on paying my own help. Thought I'd check on that account." Mr. Sorensen sighed. "I understand, Charlie. Believe me, I do. The logs will be here any day. As soon as we cut and sell the lumber, I'll pay you every cent I owe." Charlie nodded, though his face still looked worried. "All right, Harney, I trust you. Just be careful. There's talk that Dawson's been sniffing around, asking questions about your log drive." Before Mr. Sorensen could answer, Mr. Kelly, the shopkeeper, arrived. "Good morning. I won't keep you long. I just wanted to remind you about your bill for your supplies." He smiled politely, but his eyes darted toward the empty lake. Annie felt her heart sink. It wasn't just the money. It was the future of the mill and of Muskegon. "I haven't forgotten, Mr. Kelly," Mr. Sorensen said. "You'll be paid just as soon as the lumber's cut." Kelly gave a quick nod and left, and Charlie followed, shaking his head. Mr. Sorensen closed the door and leaned against it. "Annie," he said quietly, "if those logs don't come soon, I don't know what we'll do." Annie crossed the room and took his hand. "They'll come, Father. And Fred will see to it that everything goes right. I know he will." But even as she spoke, Annie couldn't help glancing out at the water, her stomach tight with worry. And in the shadows of the town, Harry Dawson watched, his cane tapping on the wooden boardwalk. A sly grin spread across his face. He had a plan, a terrible plan, to steal the logs before they reached Sorensen's mill, and to take everything for himself. Chapter 4. Little Johnny's Discovery. Little Johnny Hardy was small for his age, but what he lacked in size he made up for in speed and curiosity. Johnny ran errands for just about everyone in town: the blacksmith, the grocer, the mill, even the barber. And because people often overlooked him, Johnny heard things that no one else noticed. That afternoon, Johnny was hurrying across town with a message for Fred Hansen when he spotted Harry Dawson stepping into the Canterbury House, the busiest saloon in Muskegon. Johnny paused. Dawson never went in there during the day. Something was up. Johnny's heart raced. He crept to the saloon's side window and peered through a crack in the shutters. Inside, Dawson leaned across a table, talking in low tones to a rough-looking man with a shaggy beard and a scar across his cheek. Johnny recognized him at once: Gilmer, the log pirate. Everyone knew Gilmer made his living by sneaking logs out of the river, sawing off the brands that marked who owned them, and selling the stolen timber. Johnny held his breath and strained to hear. "The logs will leave Newego at dawn," Dawson was saying. "Sorensen's logs. His whole drive. I want them, Gilmer. All of them." Gilmer rubbed his chin. "That's a big job, Dawson. I'll need a crew. We'll have to cut the brands, raft the logs, tow them to your mill. It'll cost you." Dawson slid a bundle of bills across the table. "You'll get paid. Just make sure there's no mistakes. And no witnesses." Gilmer grinned. "You've got yourself a deal." Johnny's eyes widened. "They're going to steal Mr. Sorensen's logs." Before he could move, the saloon door creaked open. Johnny ducked behind a rain barrel just in time as Dawson stepped out, glancing around. The villain's sharp eyes swept the street, but saw nothing. Dawson headed off down the boardwalk, tapping his cane and humming to himself. Johnny waited until Dawson was out of sight. Then he ran as fast as his legs would carry him, dirt flying from his boots. He had to find Fred. He had to warn him before it was too late. Chapter 5. The Race to Save the Logs. Johnny burst through the mill yard, his breath coming in gasps. Sawdust swirled around his feet as he ran. He spotted Fred Hansen near the supply shed, checking ropes and tools. "Fred!" Johnny shouted. "Fred! It's Dawson! He's going to steal the logs!" Fred turned, surprised by the boy's panic. "Slow down, Johnny. What are you talking about?" Johnny grabbed Fred's arm and tugged him toward the office. "I heard him! Dawson and Gilmer! They're planning to ambush the river drive at the flats, cut the brands off the logs, and steal the whole shipment for Dawson's mill." Fred's face went pale. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Johnny said, his eyes wide. "I heard every word through the saloon window." Fred didn't waste a second. "Come on, we're going to the police. This is too big to handle alone." Together they ran down Main Street to the town hall. The police chief, a tall man with a thick mustache, listened carefully as Fred and Johnny told their story. The chief frowned. "This is a serious claim," he said, "and I can't arrest a man like Dawson on the word of a boy. No offense, Johnny." "But it's true," Johnny insisted. "You'll see." Fred clenched his fists. "Then come with us, Chief. Bring your men. If we're wrong, fine. But if we're right, Muskegon's whole future is at stake." The chief studied Fred's determined face. Finally, he nodded. "All right. I'll take a few officers and ride out to the flats. If there's any trouble, we'll stop it." Minutes later, Fred, Johnny, the chief, and his men galloped toward the river mouth. Fred's heart pounded as the spring wind ripped past his face. He pictured Dawson and Gilmer waiting in the shadows with their gang, ready to snatch the logs and destroy Mr. Sorensen's mill. Not if I can help it, Fred thought. Not today. Behind them, Muskegon bustled with the usual business of a growing town. But out at the flats, a battle for Muskegon's future was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Big Picnic and a Happy Ending. The next day dawned bright and clear. The whole town of Muskegon gathered at the lakeshore for the annual spring picnic, a celebration of the first log drives of the season. Tables were piled high with pies, bread, and roasted meats. Children played tag near the water. A fiddler tuned his strings, ready for the square dance. But Annie Sorensen wasn't in a festive mood. She stood at the edge of the crowd, shading her eyes, searching the horizon for any sign of the logs, or of Fred. "Where are they?" she whispered. "Where's Fred?" Just then, the mayor, dressed in his finest coat, stepped onto a wooden platform and raised his hands for silence. "My friends," he called, "today we welcome the river drives that bring prosperity to our town. Look, there on the water, the first logs are arriving." A cheer went up as the townfolk spotted the dark shapes of logs floating into Muskegon Lake. But Annie's heart was still tight with worry. She borrowed the mayor's telescope and focused on the scene. What she saw made her breath catch. There, at the mouth of the river, a fight had broken out. She could see Gilmer and his gang trying to steal the logs, and Fred, the police, and the log drivers battling to stop them. And right in the middle of the action, little Johnny, the brave boy, was waving his arms, helping direct the police. "The police are winning!" Annie cried. "Fred and the log drivers are fighting them off. They've captured Gilmer and the logs. They're headed for Father's mill." Mr. Sorensen grabbed the telescope and looked for himself. A grin spread across his face. "By thunder, that Fred is a fine young man. I was wrong to doubt him." As the logs floated toward the mill and the danger passed, the picnic erupted into true celebration. The fiddler struck up Old Susanna, and people danced with joy. The townsfolk cheered Fred and the others as they returned, muddy and tired, but victorious. Just as the picnic was ending, Harry Dawson tried to slip into the crowd, pretending nothing had happened. But Johnny spotted him, and with a grin, stomped on Dawson's foot. "Ow!" Dawson yelped. Before he could do anything, the police arrived and placed him under arrest. The townspeople clapped as Dawson and Gilmer were led away, their plans ruined. Fred turned to Mr. Sorensen and Annie, wiping sweat and river water from his brow. "The logs are safe, sir. The mill can start cutting first thing tomorrow." Mr. Sorensen clapped him on the shoulder. "You've done well, Fred. Maybe it's time we talked about those other plans of yours." He glanced at Annie, who blushed and smiled. And so, as the saws roared to life the next morning, and Muskegon's mill wheels turned again, the town cheered the heroes who had saved the day, and built a future strong as the white pines that had made Muskegon the Lumber Queen.